Russell Westbrook just walked away from the NBA. And the strangest part is that he may not have needed to. After 18 seasons, Westbrook announced his retirement on his own terms. But according to recent reports, this wasn't simply a case of an aging star running out of options. The Sacramento Kings and Washington Wizards had reportedly shown interest in bringing him back. So Westbrook had a choice. He could have taken another contract, added another season to his already historic career, and chased whatever was still left. Instead, he decided that 18 seasons were enough. And that decision makes his retirement much more interesting than it first appeared. Because this wasn't the ending of a player who had nothing left to offer. This was a former MVP, 9-time All-Star, and the NBA's triple-double king deciding that he was finished, even with opportunities still on the table. The question is, why now? And when you look back at everything Westbrook went through after reaching the absolute peak of his career, the answer becomes a lot more complicated than simply saying he was ready to retire.
Every museum has a curator, and every exhibit, they have a story. But some stories don't need someone to tell them. They just speak for themselves. So tonight, I'm not going to tell you what any of this means. I'm just going to show you. And I'm going to ask him a few questions along the way, not because I expect an answer, but because some things deserve to be asked, even in silence. This one's from the inner city of South Central. Before any of it, before the triple-doubles, before the MVP, before anybody outside of Los Angeles knew his name. Because why not? This was the next chapter. The Sonics made him the number 4 pick in 2008. No one in OKC could have told you what he'd become. And this is the one people point to, like it explains everything. It doesn't. Well, not really. Russ, what kept you going all those years? What made you get back up night after night when the whole league had a highlight reel of you falling down? Yeah, I figured that. You know, people forget.
Nobody knew who I was. Nobody knew who I was.
Before he was a walking headline, he was just a kid from inner city LA who could jump higher than anybody had a right to.
Russell Westbrook from UCLA.
Somewhere between the dunks and the draft classes, he became something else. Not just a player, a personality. A meme before we even called it that. A husband, a father, a guy in a kilt at the Met, daring anybody to say something. What did winning mean to you? I mean, really? No, not just the trophies, the actual feeling of it. Some things you don't say. You just play them over and over until everyone else understands too. Because why not? This swing isn't finished yet. That's not a mistake. We left it this way on purpose. Because whatever's next, the mentorship, the foundation, the kids who are going to grow up wanting to move just like he did, that part hasn't been built yet either. Were you ever afraid of what happens after the game stops needing you? This swing isn't finished. Neither is he. And that's the point. Last question. Now that you decided to step away from everything on your own terms, what are you the most proud of? That might be the best interview I've ever done. He didn't say a word. And somehow, I understood everything.
Then there are the numbers, and this is where Westbrook's career becomes almost impossible to put into perspective. He finishes with 209 career triple-doubles, a number that once seemed completely untouchable. During his 2016-17 MVP season, he recorded an unbelievable 42 triple-doubles and averaged 31.6 points, 10.7 rebounds, and 10.4 assists per game. He became the first player since Oscar Robertson to average a triple-double across an entire season, turning something that had once looked almost impossible into his trademark. But Westbrook didn't stop there. He leaves the NBA ranked 5th all-time in assists with 10,351 and 14th in scoring with 27,176 points. He was selected to 9 All-Star teams, won back-to-back All-Star Game MVP awards, led the league in scoring twice, led it in assists 3 times, and even earned a spot on the NBA's 75th anniversary team. And yet, those numbers only tell part of the story. Behind every statistic was a player who played with an intensity that rarely changed, whether he was having a spectacular night or struggling to find his rhythm. That's what made Westbrook so difficult to ignore. You could debate his decisions, his shooting, or the way his career unfolded, but you couldn't simply erase the production. And the craziest part is that none of these numbers explain how he went from a young guard in Oklahoma City to one of the most talked about players of his generation. That story starts much earlier. Everything really changed for Westbrook when he arrived in Oklahoma City. Drafted 4th overall in 2008, he joined a young Thunder team that was still trying to figure out what it could become. At the time, nobody knew they were watching the beginning of one of the most talented cores of the era. Westbrook quickly developed alongside Kevin Durant, and eventually James Harden joined them, giving Oklahoma City 3 future MVPs on the same roster. They were young, explosive, and fearless, and by 2012, the Thunder had reached the NBA Finals. They ultimately fell to LeBron James and the Miami Heat, but that run changed the expectations surrounding the franchise. Westbrook was no longer simply Durant's teammate. He had become a star in his own right, and his relentless style made him one of the hardest players in the league to contain. Then everything began to fall apart. Harden was traded. Durant eventually left Oklahoma City, and suddenly Westbrook was carrying the franchise by himself. Instead of backing down, he responded with one of the most extraordinary individual seasons the NBA had ever seen. In 2016-17, he averaged a triple-double, scored 31.6 points per game, and broke Oscar Robertson's single-season triple-double record with 42. He won the MVP and turned Oklahoma City into his team. But that historic season also marked the beginning of a new chapter. Westbrook had proven he could carry a franchise, but from that point forward, the question would become whether his individual brilliance could translate into the kind of team success everyone expected from a player of his stature. And that's where his career took a very different turn. But after reaching the absolute peak in Oklahoma City, Westbrook's career started taking a completely different direction. His MVP season made him a superstar, but it also placed an enormous spotlight on everything he did. After leaving the Thunder, he joined the Houston Rockets in 2019, teaming up with James Harden again. The reunion created plenty of excitement, but the fit didn't last. After just one season, Westbrook was on the move again, this time to Washington. There, he reminded everyone that he could still put up huge numbers, averaging a triple-double and earning another All-Star selection. But then came the move that changed the conversation around him more than any other. In 2021, Westbrook joined the Los Angeles Lakers alongside LeBron James and Anthony Davis. On paper, it looked like a superstar trio. In reality, the fit became one of the biggest debates in the league. Westbrook's shooting struggles, turnovers, and inconsistent stretches became constant talking points, while every mistake seemed to receive even more attention because of the Lakers' spotlight. The criticism followed him through his next stages of his career, including stops with the Clippers and Nuggets, before he eventually landed in Sacramento. Yet there was another side to the story. Even as his role changed, Westbrook kept finding ways to contribute, compete, and stay in the league far longer than many expected. His final season with the Kings wasn't the same version of Westbrook fans had watched in his MVP years, but he was still producing 15.2 points, 6.7 rebounds, and 6.1 assists per game across 64 appearances. That's what made his career so complicated. You could argue about his efficiency, his decisions, or whether he fits certain teams, but it was almost impossible to argue that he lacked confidence or effort. And now, after years of being praised, criticized, defended, and questioned, the most surprising part is that he reportedly still had teams interested in him, yet he chose to leave the game anyway. And this is the detail that completely changes how Westbrook's retirement looks. If you only saw the announcement, you might assume the league had simply moved on from him, but recent reports tell a different story. According to Shams Charania, Westbrook had off-season offers from both the Sacramento Kings and Washington Wizards. In other words, retirement wasn't necessarily his only option. There were still NBA teams willing to bring him back. That's what makes his decision so intriguing. Westbrook could have signed another contract, accepted a smaller role, and tried to squeeze another season out of a career that had already lasted 18 years. Instead, he walked away. Now, it's important to separate what we know from what we're only speculating about. Westbrook hasn't publicly explained every detail behind his decision, so nobody outside his circle can say exactly what convinced him to stop. But the reported offers make one thing clear. This wasn't simply a situation where there was nowhere left for him to play. He had opportunities, and he chose not to take them. Maybe another season no longer felt worth the sacrifice. Maybe he believed he had already accomplished everything he wanted from basketball. Or maybe after spending nearly 2 decades under the spotlight, he simply wanted to leave the game while the decision was still completely his. Whatever the reason, that choice feels very fitting for Westbrook. His entire career was built around playing with conviction, even when the outside noise told him to do something different. And now, at the very end, he's making one more decision on his own terms. But the reaction from the people who shared the court with him shows just how much that decision actually meant. The reaction around the NBA made it clear that Westbrook's impact went beyond the box score. One of the most meaningful messages came from Kevin Durant, his former teammate in Oklahoma City. Durant reflected on how Westbrook's work ethic influenced him, remembering that Russ would already be finished with his morning workout before Durant even arrived at the gym. He described Westbrook as quiet and methodical away from the spotlight, someone who simply showed up and let his intensity speak for itself. After everything those two went through together, that tribute carried a little extra weight. Klay Thompson also shared an emotional reaction, joining a long list of players who recognized what Westbrook brought to the league. LeBron James posted his own message, calling it a great career and pointing toward Westbrook's eventual Hall of Fame recognition. But even that tribute sparked debate online. Some fans questioned the message because of the complicated history between LeBron and Westbrook during their time together with the Lakers. Those reactions are fan opinions, not proof of any hidden issue, but they show just how polarizing Westbrook remained even at the very end. And then there was Draymond Green, who took a different approach. Rather than simply celebrating Westbrook, Green called out fans for suddenly giving Russ his flowers after years of criticizing him. That reaction exposed something bigger about Westbrook's legacy. While he was playing, every missed shot, turnover, or controversial decision could become a debate. But the moment he walked away, many people started looking at the entire career instead of just the flaws. Maybe that's the most interesting part of the farewell. Westbrook spent years being one of the easiest players in basketball to argue about. Yet when the game was finally over, the conversation shifted toward everything he actually accomplished. The MVP, the 9 All-Star selections, the 209 triple-doubles, the relentless competitiveness. And now, after all those years of debate, the NBA has to answer one final question. How should Russell Westbrook actually be remembered? And now comes the part of Westbrook's career that'll probably be debated for years. Just how great was he really? There is no question about the resume. He leaves the NBA as a former MVP, a 9-time All-Star, a member of the NBA's 75th anniversary team, and the all-time leader in triple-doubles with 209. He also finished 5th in career assists and 14th in scoring, numbers that put him in some very rare company. But then there's the argument that has followed him almost his entire career. Westbrook never won an NBA championship, and he only reached the finals once, back in 2012 with Oklahoma City. His critics will point to his shooting efficiency, turnovers, playoff disappointments, and the way some of his later teams struggled to find the right role for him. Those criticisms are part of the story, whether people like it or not. But reducing Westbrook to those flaws would miss what made him unique. He didn't simply collect triple-doubles because he was chasing numbers. He completely changed the expectations for what a point guard could do physically. For years, averaging a triple-double was considered almost impossible. Westbrook eventually did it 4 times, while his 2016-17 season produced 42 triple-doubles and an MVP award. And now there's another interesting question. How long will that 209 triple-double record actually survive? Nikola Jokic has been steadily closing the gap, while Domantas Sabonis has also established himself among the league's elite triple-double producers. Westbrook may have finished his career on top, but the next generation could eventually make that record look a lot less untouchable than it once seemed. Still, records alone aren't the reason Westbrook's legacy will last. It's the way he played. Every possession felt urgent. Every attack at the rim looked personal. Even when the results weren't perfect, there was rarely any question about his confidence or competitiveness. The NBA itself described him as one of the all-time great point guards, and that tells you how dramatically his reputation has evolved from the constant criticism he faced during his later years. Maybe that's why his retirement feels different. Westbrook's career doesn't fit neatly into a simple great or disappointing label. He was an MVP who never won a championship, a record-breaking superstar who became one of the league's most debated players, a player who was criticized for years, yet still finished with statistics that most NBA stars could never dream of reaching. And perhaps the most fitting part is that Westbrook gets to leave before anyone else gets to decide what his final chapters should have been. He played for 18 seasons, broke records, took the criticism, embraced the pressure, and walked away as the league's triple-double king. The debate over Russell Westbrook's career isn't going to disappear, but maybe that's exactly what makes his legacy so unforgettable. In the end, Russell Westbrook didn't let the NBA decide when his story was over. He did. After 18 seasons, 209 triple-doubles, an MVP, 9 All-Star selections, and a career that took him through 7 franchises, Westbrook walked away while the choice was still his. Reports that he had interest from Sacramento and Washington make that decision even striking. He could have stayed around, accepted another role, and added another chapter to the resume. Instead, he decided there was nothing left he needed to prove. That feels fitting for a player who spent his entire career refusing to play cautiously. Westbrook was never afraid of the pressure, the criticism, or the possibility of failing in front of millions of people. His career had incredible highs and difficult stretches, but he always played with the same relentless belief. Even when the conversation around him became negative, he kept showing up. And now, when he could have continued, he made the decision himself. His retirement video captured that perfectly. There wasn't a traditional press conference or a long explanation. Instead, Westbrook delivered a mysterious farewell through a short film narrated by Michael B. Jordan, ending with the idea that the greatest thing he left behind couldn't fit inside a museum. Maybe that's the final message of the Westbrook era. The debates about his shooting, his turnovers, his playoff struggles, and his lack of a championship will continue, but none of those arguments can erase what he actually accomplished. He changed the meaning of a triple-double, became one of the most explosive guards of his generation, and built a resume that will be discussed long after he's gone. And now, the player who spent 18 years playing at full speed has finally decided to stop. Not because the game forced him out, not because his legacy needed another season, but because Russell Westbrook decided that this was his ending. And honestly, there may be no more fitting way for one of the NBA's most fearless players to walk away.